Greetings, friends. Randall Nagy here. I wanted to tell you a little bit about a program I just finished up today that I am calling Rogue One. I started Rogue One about 6 months ago in response to the need several students related to me to discover how to use their newfound programming skills, in this case using Python 3, so as to keep inspired as well as motivated to get their programming skills to the next level. Located as it is over here on GitHub under the Rogue One project, at the time of this recording, we simply have a main one, and inside main one, of course, we're going to have a program called main.py, which will open up a package, and we learned about packages in Python 2000, and merely by including our init.py, you'll see that we have some interesting nouns that are going to have some interesting verbs. Some of these classes are simply marker classes, in which case I mean that we will have a need to have a common operation, for example, in this case, a point, but we're going to have two types of points that do nothing more than clarify the user interface that we have, in this case, having a grid point, or something that is a point in a screen cell or grid, and then we have a GUI point, or a graphical user interface point, which is simply locations of a pixel on a screen. By allowing ourselves to have a grid point and a point, of course, what we're allowing ourselves to actually do is to have the events managed so that when we allow ourselves to have some information come into our games, in this case, we're going to have both a key click as well as a mouse click. We can differentiate between what's going on from the GUI point and then convert that point back over to a grid point so as to allow ourselves to map our points together. Far from the only marker class, of course, we also have other types of divisions. We would have a ship, and a ship could be anything. Typically, we're using it to be the player, who is also going to be based upon something called a noun, and then going to noun, we will see that noun is also based upon something called a mover, or something that will allow ourselves to move our cell across the screen. Now, of course, we know that we're going to be a cell across the screen because mover is also part of something that can be displayed, or what we're calling a shower. And upon looking at shower, we see that we are indeed using a grid point so as to plot ourselves back on our event screen. Keeping the design as clear and easy to understand as possible, of course, when we plot ourselves, you should be expecting to see the verb plot in our GUI event manager, and we see that we are taking a grid point, which would translate to a string that's displayed on our screen, so as to allow our cell to actually be nothing more or less than a fixed pitch, or a very easy to understand size character in a courier or system or fixed pitch font. Now, we're getting a little bit advanced. I'm not going to talk about the differences between fonts. I do that in my TK Inter courses. But suffice to say that when we're using a courier font, the width and height of a character are such that they can be spaced a lot more predictably when we do something like run our main application. Looking at, of course, the only file you have to run once you download the program from GitHub, you'll see that now we're using all of our marker classes as well as our console class, which does nothing more than maintain our game for us, but the actual game is going to be part of the user interface, or the graphical user interface, which is going to run our console for us. The reason for using those marker classes, of course, was to allow ourselves to manage things in such a way as to process the turn taking, so that we make sure all of our resources have been processed and our markers have been updated before actual player interactions occur with them. But otherwise, as we saw, they're mostly marker classes. And at the time of this recording, the only thing that we have to really worry about is ship because unlike you may expect, when we use the ship, it's going to be the player, but more importantly, after we call our nouns way that eventually will allow ourselves to be plotted, we're going to take our grid location over to the GUI location, and then we're going to draw a circle, a graphical circle, on what traditionally you might think would only be a console user interface, so as to give ourselves a rather unique as well as rich user experience whenever we choose to download and run that main.py. Upon running the same, notice that we have some debug code in here that will allow ourselves to click on the screen and then get a GUI point to wherever that location is. And the way we program this demonstration was simply to allow ourselves to hit any key, and then we'll begin to see that we can move our player around using keystrokes that will allow us to not only assign new keystrokes, but more importantly, when we press the question mark, has been pre-programmed to show us what each one of those keys will do for us. Including the ability to quit things, I find the ability to have a screen relative location being posted to be very handy. And of course, the reason why we're negative here is that I'm using a screen that is above my default console screen, so I'm actually 443 pixels above where I want to be. But if I move that screen down to where my main screen is, you see the coordinates adjust accordingly. So what we're getting, of course, is not only GUI coordinates, but of course we're getting global GUI coordinates, which can track to as many monitors as we may have in play at the moment. Remembering that the way we have programmed things was to simply allow us to press question mark to see our help on our display, and that every time I hit a key, I will get a movement processed, or everything will age in our framework. I think you'll find that the ability to have such an easy way to create and study the creation of both object-oriented principles as well as properties, let alone the new concept of marker classes, will make lessons in Python 1000, 2000, as well as 2100 a lot more easy to practice as well as to master, so as to allow you to create your very own first game. Now, as we saw when we run our application, the fact that we are using what appears to be a console interface does not stop us from treating that interface in a graphical way. In a like manner, if you ever hear anybody talk discouragingly about console games or text user interfaces, I'd like you to merely keep in mind that these type of text modeling interfaces are often and very often used as a very first step to allow a programmer to create a game offering or real-world simulation that eventually can be replaced with tile graphics or even wireframe graphics, and therefore can be a very intelligent and quick start to creating what can be a commercially successful real-world simulation or programming game. As a matter of fact, in addition to being a roguelike, which explains the use of our name of Rogue One, a genre unto itself, a lot of popular calculators, tic-tac-toe boards, chess and checker games, dungeon crawlers, etc. have been created and are being created in the console mold, and even the tile-based graphic games, let alone the 3D first-person capabilities, can all have a humble start by using such a textual and console user interface. So I hope you enjoy Rogue One. And if you need to learn more about Python, let alone how to use Python in an object-oriented way, or would simply like to know more about how you can use that TK user interface so as to allow yourselves to create even more graphical objects using Rogue One and elsewhere, I would encourage you to use the link in Rogue One and take a look at our other popular training opportunities at Udemy as well as other training content providers.